Warhammer 40,000, one of the most iconic science fiction franchises in the world, did not spring into existence fully formed. It is the result of decades of creative evolution, market experimentation, and a collision of dark imagination with British tabletop gaming culture. The story of how Warhammer 40k came to be is as complex and fascinating as the grim universe it portrays. A tale of artistic inspiration, business gambles, and the slow building of a mythology that now spans thousands of years of fictional history, dozens of factions, and an ever-growing legion of fans across the globe. The origins of Warhammer 40k can be traced back to Games Workshop, a British company founded in 1975 by Ian Livingstone, Steve Jackson, and John Peake. Originally focused on distributing American tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons to the UK, Games Workshop soon began producing their own materials and established a publishing arm known as Citadel Miniatures, which began crafting detailed figures for wargames. This period saw the release of Warhammer Fantasy Battle in 1983, a grim and gritty take on traditional high fantasy. This game proved enormously successful and laid the groundwork for a unique aesthetic that would soon evolve into something entirely new. The idea to create a science fiction counterpart to Warhammer Fantasy was driven by multiple factors. The success of science fiction media in the late 70s and early 80s, like Star Wars and Alien, a desire to explore futuristic themes in a similarly dark style, and the enthusiasm of the company's creative team. Leading the charge was designer Rick Priestley, who envisioned a dystopian future of constant warfare, corrupted ideologies, and lost technologies. His work culminated in the release of Warhammer 40,000, Rogue Trader in 1987, the first edition of what would become a sprawling, multi-dimensional universe. Rogue Trader was unlike later iterations of the game. It was less focused on competitive play and more of a hybrid between a miniature wargame and a role-playing system. The rulebook was dense, filled with lore, random tables, and narrative hooks. It featured early versions of factions that would later become central to the setting: Space Marines, Eldar, Orcs, Chaos, and more. But these early versions were rough. Space Marines were heavily individualized. Orcs had distinct clans, but a wilder, sillier feel. And the Imperium of Man was a nightmarish bureaucracy, but not yet the full-blown theocratic tyranny it would evolve into. The tone was satirical, often irreverent, and laced with black humor, but the seeds of the universe's dark grandeur were firmly planted. As the years passed, the setting began to crystallize. The second edition of Warhammer 40k, released in 1993, brought more structure to the game and introduced players to a more visually coherent and dramatically darker universe. The Imperium became more monolithic and brutal. The Emperor of Mankind, a mysterious, immortal being entombed upon the Golden Throne, was reimagined not just as a ruler, but a religious figure, the God Emperor worshipped by billions. The Adeptus Astartes, or Space Marines, were redefined as superhuman warrior monks, gene-forged from the DNA of the Emperor's demigod sons, the Primarchs, each of whom would become the progenitor of a great legion. The lore expanded exponentially in the 90s and early 2000s. Writers and artists built layer upon layer of narrative complexity, drawing inspiration from mythology, classical history, dystopian fiction, Lovecraftian horror, and the heavy metal culture of the time. New factions emerged: the ancient Necrons, the mindless horror of the Tyranids, the idealistic yet flawed Toe Empire, and the sadistic Drukhari, formerly Dark Eldar. Chaos, originally a loose concept of corruption and mutation, became a fully fleshed-out pantheon of malevolent warp entities: Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, each representing a fundamental aspect of sentient emotion and psychic energy. The warp itself was expanded into a parallel dimension of raw psychic power and madness, allowing for faster-than-light travel, but also serving as a source of demonic possession and ruin. One of the greatest contributions to the lore came in the form of the Horus Heresy, a prequel mythos set 10,000 years before the current timeline. Initially only hinted at in early materials, The Horus Heresy became the focal point for a sprawling novel series published by Black Library, Games Workshop's fiction imprint. Beginning with Horus Rising by Dan Abnett in 2006, the series chronicles the tragic fall of Horus, the Emperor's most beloved son, and the galaxy-spanning civil war that tore the Imperium apart. This series transformed Warhammer 40k from a dark parody into a truly epic saga of ambition, betrayal, loyalty, and cosmic horror. It humanized the Primarchs, portrayed the Emperor as both savior and tyrant, and gave fans a rich historical lens through which to view the present-day setting. Meanwhile, the tabletop game continued to evolve. Each new edition of Warhammer 40k brought updated rules, refined mechanics, and reimagined models. Technological advances in miniatures production led to increasingly detailed and dynamic sculpts. The arrival of the Primaris Marines in the 8th edition marked a major shift in the setting's metaplot, pushing the narrative forward for the first time in decades. Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, was resurrected and took up leadership of the Imperium once more as Lord Commander, ushering in the Era Indomitus, a time of renewed war following the catastrophic creation of the Great Rift, a warp storm that split the galaxy in half. As Warhammer 40k's universe expanded, so too did its presence in other media. Video games such as Dawn of War, Space Marine, Battlefleet Gothic, Armada, Darktide, and many others introduced the setting to new audiences. Comics, audiobooks, tabletop RPGs, and board games further enriched the universe. Perhaps most importantly, the fanbase grew. Players and readers from all over the world began contributing art, stories, and theories. The community became as much a part of the Warhammer mythos as the official materials. Today, Warhammer 40k stands as a unique fusion of game and mythos. It is a universe so rich in history, detail, and contradiction that it feels alive, constantly evolving, always dark, always dramatic. It is a place where gods are born from thought, where civilizations rise and fall in the blink of a cosmic eye, and where the last hope of humanity lies not in peace, but in endless, brutal war. It is a setting where the only certainty is death, and the only answer to the future's horrors is the sound of bolter fire. And yet, in its grim darkness, it has captured imaginations for generations. Proof that even the bleakest of futures can be fertile ground for storytelling.